We're doing some positive things, but I'm a bit worried about the cutting of the winter fuel allowance. And one of the things that's difficult about it, I think particularly for newer colleagues, people don't vote Labour only for a few weeks later. People, the Labour Party take money off pensioners. And I only hope that this is kind of an aberration and we aren't going to see further cuts in welfare. Because that would be very difficult for us as MPs and extraordinarily painful for people that voted for us.
You know what the Prime Minister says and what the Chancellor says. They claim they've discovered this £22 billion black hole. Your facial expression looks sceptical about that. You're smiling. But that's why they say they're doing it. And they have said they had no choice but to cut this payment to pensioners.
Well, first of all, my view is that everything you needed to know about the state of the finances was in the public domain, and the rest of it could be guessed at. And this idea they had no choice, politics is about choosing, and there were other ways to raise that money. And raising it by taking the money off pensioners is, I don't think, not very good.
You didn't support the government in the vote to stop them cutting winter fuel payments for all but the poorest of pensioners. You abstained. Why didn't you vote against it?
I was a Labour MP the last time we were in government, and there's always been an idea that you shouldn't vote against your government with the Tories, particularly when you know the Tories don't believe a word of what they're saying. And so I think it was that. I felt a bit uncomfortable doing that. But I've got no doubt there are going to be issues coming up where I will, again, find myself in opposition to my government.
Do you fear being suspended again? Or
No. I mean, they took it away from me once. It's up to them if they want to do it again. No, I'm not fussed about that.
In terms of the budget, the Prime Minister said those with the broadest shoulders will bear the heaviest burden. Does that not reassure you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, he's turned down the idea of a wealth tax, and that would be a way of making the broadest shoulders bear the problem. So we'll just have to see.
In your autobiography, you describe yourself as having been, quote, a public punchbag for racist abuse for most of your working life. When you heard what Conservative donor Frank Hester had said about you, and I'm going to quote his words, it's like trying not to be racist, but you see Diane Abbott on the television and you just want to hate all black women because she is there. And I don't hate all black women, but I think she should be shot. Diane Abbott needs to be shot. How did that make you feel?
It made me feel frightened, actually. Obviously, we get a lot of abuse online, but one of the reasons it made me frightened is 2 MPs have been killed in recent years. And you see, that sort of thing winds up a certain sort of nutcase, and it makes you more vulnerable.
So, as a direct result of those comments, you felt in danger?
Yes, I did. And obviously, as a result of those comments, we got even more threatening correspondence and emails and so on.
It took 24 hours or so before the spokesman for the Prime Minister would describe the comments as actually racist. Mr. Hester himself said in a statement that he'd apologised to you. He described his comments as rude, but nothing to do with gender nor the colour of your skin.
Well, first of all, he didn't apologise to me directly. And second of all, it was extraordinary that it took so long for the Prime Minister to acknowledge they were racist comments. Even other black Tory MPs kind of stopped me and said, of course they were racist.
Frank Hester said he tried to ring you.
Yeah, well, I think he did try and ring me in the end, but I had nothing to say to him. How can you say somebody should be shot and then think you can ring up and say, oh, I didn't mean it?
So you didn't take his call?
No, I didn't take his call.
When these comments emerged, you were sitting as an independent MP, having been suspended over alleged anti-Semitic comments in a letter you wrote to the Observer newspaper. Did you get any support from Keir Starmer or the Labour Party as these comments from Hester were being reported?
Hardly any support at all. I remember the comments were in a broadsheet newspaper online on Monday, and so people read them, obviously. We didn't get any support at that point. The next morning, a colleague, Annalise Dodds, was on another television station, and the presenter said to her, "Have you reached out to Diane Abbott?" And she just kind of squirmed and said, "Well, I've been in a meeting all morning." We did get, I think, messages from Starmer's office and from Annalise Dodds that afternoon, but they didn't reach out to us in any meaningful way.
How do you think you were treated by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party at that time?
I think initially I was treated as a non-person, which felt very strange because, well, at the same time, they were writing to party members trying to raise money on the back of how Hester had treated me without mentioning me, which was a bit odd.
And when you say non-person, I mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, you'd feel that if somebody was threatening to have you shot, you would have felt that your party would have offered you more support, given you advice on safety and security, even kind of commiserated with you, and none of that happened.
And are you saying that the leader, Keir Starmer, treated you as a non-person?
As I recall, Keir Starmer treated me as a non-person, and I got more support from the leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn, than I got from the leader of my own party.
And when you mentioned Stephen Flynn, you're talking about the day in PMQs when many people stood up and talked about Hester's comments, and you stood up dozens and dozens of times to try and get a word in. You weren't called, and at the end, Stephen Flynn came over to talk to you, and then Keir Starmer did. What did he say to you?
Well, the press gallery could see Stephen Flynn coming up and talking to me quite genuinely, and so I think he felt he had to do it as well. He said, "What can I do for you, Diane?" So I said, "You can restore the whip." And then he said again, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "You can restore the whip." And then he went off. I mean, that Prime Minister's questions was extraordinary. I mean, I've never seen a Prime Minister's questions where somebody is the topic of most of the discussion and they're not called to speak.
And how did that make you feel on that day? Well, everyone's talking about you. You're desperately trying to have your voice heard, and you weren't called.
I was upset by that because I hadn't said anything publicly about Hester since the beginning of the week, because I wanted to save my thoughts for Prime Minister's questions. And when I wasn't called, that was very upsetting.
I want to read the letter, or some of the letter that you wrote to The Observer, which was in response to a column that had suggested that Irish, Jewish and traveller people all suffer from racism. You wrote, "They undoubtedly experience prejudice. This is similar to racism, and the two words are often used as if they're interchangeable. It is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as redheads, can experience this prejudice, but they are not all their lives subject to racism." What did you mean?
Well, let me first say it was very poorly worded, and I apologise within hours. What I was trying to talk about was race-based discrimination, because if you walk down the street, nobody can tell whether you're Irish or anything else. But if I walk down the street, or my son walks down the street, people know straight away that he's black.
After it was published, there was a backlash against what you'd written. Within hours, as you say, you apologised unreservedly, you withdrew your remarks. But the letter was seen as essentially denying anti-Jewish racism. You know the history of Jewish people. You fought against racism all your life. Do you accept that it was denying anti-Jewish racism?
No, not at all. I mean, I represent a constituency which historically had one of the largest Jewish communities in the country, and we're still, I think, the 7th largest Jewish community. Not at all.
But as somebody who's experienced racism yourself, people were asking, how could you say that? How could you say that about Jewish people?
Well, it wasn't denying anti-Jewish racism, and I think a lot of people did understand the point I was trying to make.
Do you want to take this opportunity to apologise again?
Well, I did apologise at the time, but I have no problem in apologising again. It was never my intention to cause offence.
At the time, Keir Starmer described your comments, your letter, as anti-Semitic. For the record, are you anti-Semitic?
No. You know, as I say, I represent a kind of classic centre of Jewish residents. As I say, one of the biggest Jewish communities still in the country. And if I was anti-Semitic, my tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jewish constituents would have spotted it after 37 years.
You were suspended by the Labour Party. An investigation was begun into you. What was that like?
Well, the investigation was very strange. The letter was, I think, 250 words, and it took them 8 months to investigate it. I wasn't called for interview. All that happened was I filled in a form, and then we waited 8 months to get any type of resolution.
So no one spoke to you directly? No one asked you what you'd meant?
Nobody spoke to me directly. As I said, I wasn't called for interview. Nobody spoke to me directly. Nobody asked me what I meant by the letter. I just filled in a form online. And I did go and do some anti-racism training, which was fine. I don't think I'm a racist, but I was fine to do the training. But it was quite extraordinary that nobody ever spoke to me and that it went on so long.
So what do you think was going on?
I think that Keir Starmer wanted to finish his clear-out of the left in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And by writing a very ill-advised letter, I gave them the opportunity to move against me. And I think what they were trying to do was to string out the investigation. So when a general election was around the corner, they could just move me out of the way as a Labour candidate because I wouldn't be in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and parachute in someone else.
Right, so to string out the investigation and the suspension, so when it comes to the selection process, you're suspended, so you can't be a candidate.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. How low did you get during this period?
Well, I did get very low, not least because I thought this was all preparatory to getting rid of me altogether as an MP.
Would you say you were depressed?
Yes, I was depressed because it felt very unfair. As I say, and other people had their cases resolved much more quickly. And at one point, Keir Starmer was saying the investigation was going on when I knew the investigation had been completed.
In fact, in May, Newsnight revealed that the investigation into you had been completed last December, although publicly the impression given by the party was that it was still going on. You'd already been informed, you'd brought the party into disrepute, you were given a formal warning, required to complete an online anti-Semitism course, which you did. And then nothing happened. So it was a kind of limbo.
It was. I was in limbo, but with a very strong suspicion that they were keeping me in limbo with a view to getting rid of me. And they had done that to other people. Strung out their barring from the Parliamentary Labour Party and then got rid of them.
Why would they want to get rid of you?
Because I'm one of the last leading left-wingers in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And Keir Starmer's always saying, it's a new Labour Party, it's new, And how could you make it look more new than by getting rid of Diane Abbott?
Were you ever offered any kind of deal?
Indirectly, they offered me a deal through a third party. But I wasn't prepared to do a deal. It seemed to me that who wanted to get rid of me, I was going to make it easy for them. They were going to go ahead and have to do it.
And what was offered to you?
Well, as I say, it was through a third party.
Can you tell us who that was?
No, I can't. It would be unfair on her. But I think the idea was that they would restore the whip Okay, but literally they would restore the whip in the morning, and then I would stand down in the afternoon. Not the next day, not the next week, but in the afternoon. And I felt that was designed to humiliate me. And people in my local party said it would look like a deal. And furthermore, people would think that you had sold the party, because everyone knew at that point the party would just parachute somebody in, and the local party wouldn't have a chance to choose.
Was there ever an offer of a seat in the Lords if you agreed to that first bit of the deal?
Well, nobody said that to anybody, but there was this sense. The problem is, you should never say never, but I've never wanted to go to the Lords, really. It doesn't appeal to me.
But was that specifically broached or not?
It wasn't specifically broached with me, but as I say, the third party who was doing the negotiation, there was an idea that, I could go to the Lords.
Throughout your whole working life, you have received masses and masses of racist and violent abuse. How would you describe the impact that has had on you and continues to have on you?
It's been very difficult. I mean, in recent years, I don't read some of that stuff, even though we get thousands of racist abuse through online, in Twitter, in Facebook. But in recent years, I don't read it. My staff read it, because if I read it all, I would get very upset and very disheartened.
How many rape and death threats do you estimate that you've had?
I think we certainly have hundreds a month, if not more. And it was strange that on the day that I was re-elected for the 10th time, we had a man in court for sending me death threats.
So if it's hundreds a month, every month, over many years, I mean, what's that, 50,000? 100,000?
Tens of thousands,
Right.
Tens of thousands.
You were the first black girl in your primary school, the first black girl in your secondary school. When you became a counsellor, security initially refused to let you in the building because how could a black woman be a counsellor? As a black woman, you say that you were seen as an electoral liability by some. As you mentioned, the first and only black woman elected to Parliament in 1987 out of 650 MPs. Where does your resilience come from?
Well, you have to keep going forward, because I know there are people coming after me who, if I don't tough it out, then it'll be difficult for them. I've always felt a responsibility to a younger generation. And also, as I say, being a Jamaican migrant in the 50s wasn't easy. So I've always felt I have to show the same resilience that generation showed.
And in Britain in 2024, do you believe black women are held to a different standard?
I believe that if you're a black woman in the public eye, you are not allowed to make mistakes.
This may be your last term as an MP? Is that fair?
Maybe, yeah.
And when your political career comes to an end, whenever that may be, what would you like people to say about you?
I'd like them to say that she tried, because that's all you can do.
Just that, she tried. Yeah.
I tried.
Diane Abbott, thank you very much for talking to Newsnight.